What you're about to hear was originally published on the From This Day Forward podcast. As that podcast has been folded into this one, we're republishing the episode here on NorthWoods Church Matters. We hope you enjoy it and are edified by it. God bless.
You're listening to NorthWoods Church Matters, a podcast of NorthWoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, where we discuss why the local church matters and things that matter to the local church. I'm your host, Matt Higgins. Hey guys, welcome back to the From This Day Forward podcast. I am really excited today because we've got some great guests. We've got Jake Mentzel and Mr. Nathan Alberson from Church of the King that are here. And Jake is an Evansville native and has come back to the area to plant a church. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I've been in Bloomington since 2002. I grew up on the east side of Evansville and went up for school and stuck. Became a pastor, first a college pastor up there, then a discipleship pastor. And my wife and family, we moved down this past summer to plant Church of the King on the east side of Evansville, meeting at the Dunnigan Y at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Nathan moved with us with his wife Meredith, and now they have a baby. So yeah, we're just happy to be here, excited to be a part of what God's doing here in Evansville.
Amen. That's great. Nathan, you're a native Bloomington guy, right?
Native Bloomington guy, but I'm loving it here in Evansville.
A secret, too, is that Nathan is a secret staff person here at NorthWoods. You don't ever see him, but Nathan edits our podcast. It's a pleasure to have Nathan here. He and I have been friends for a while now, and he's done great work on our podcast. So, we often have guests from other churches on, and I hope this shows that we are not anti-other churches here in Evansville. We want y'all to grow and thrive and do what y'all do, and it's all for the glory of God and His kingdom.
There have been few other churches in the area that have proven that more than NorthWoods, just being very open-handed and generous with us. Bobby spending a lot of time with me, pouring wisdom into me and experience from church planting. It's been really, really sweet and encouraging.
Yeah, we've been really blessed by you guys.
Awesome.
We're thankful.
Well, it's a love fest here.
Yes,
in the podcast
everybody
closet.
loves everybody.
Everybody loves everybody. Well, let's talk about a topic where everybody does not love everybody. So this is a term that's floated around a lot, but I think that a lot of parents are kind of new to this. But if you check out your kids on Instagram, they're definitely into this because I actually read your kids' Instagram. Mm. But let's talk about cancel culture today. So what is cancel culture?
Well, so I grew up watching the really old, really cheesy Dracula and Frankenstein movies. The way that those movies always end, some maiden gets kidnapped by the monster, and then the townspeople suddenly realize, we've got a monster up in that castle in the hills.
Let's get the pitchforks.
Let's get the pitchforks. Let's get the torches. Let's take them down. And so they form a mob, burn the castle to the ground. They burn Frankenstein's laboratory to the ground. And I think that's a pretty good way in to talking about cancel culture.
Cancel culture is mob justice when an entitled mob basically reaches its own verdict that you've committed a thought crime.
Yeah.
Right. So you've committed a thought crime and the mob is going to come after you and come after your job and your income and your means of survival. And it can be everything from we're going to dox you, we're going to find out where you live, we're going to threaten your family, to we're going to petition your employer to fire you, to we're going to petition the credit card companies to stop allowing you to use their services or your bank to withhold funds. Or some of it's just been pressure applied.
It's big on social media, on Twitter mobs, Twitter justice. Yeah. You'll hear these terms.
The essence of it is the pitchfork of it all. It's mob justice. It's not rule of law or any kind of due process.
Yeah, and this is really a label for a phenomenon, right? Like it's not like somebody's out there saying, I'm really into cancel culture. Right. It's really that our teenagers and young adults often are getting sucked into social media and mob justice. And this is really a phenomenon of social media. Like, this existed before. I mean, people boycotted things for a long time, but now the ability with social media to do something different is crazy.
Yeah, well, boycott something. That's you deciding I'm not going to patronize a business or something because I disagree with what they stand for. Okay, that's you making a decision about where your money goes.
Yeah.
This is taking that another step further. Not only am I not going to patronize you, but I think that you should not have access or opportunity to work or to be paid or to whatever yourself.
You're the judge, the jury, and the executioner.
That's exactly right. And one of the beautiful things about the internet and social media is that it's a leveler and it gives everybody a voice. And one of the horrible things about the internet is it gives everybody a voice.
And so our kids are in this all the time. Like they're posting like, this show should be off TV. This person should be punished. All sorts of things.
I was a teenager. You're insecure and you want to find a way to define yourself. And one easy thing to fall into is defining yourself against or finding a group to define yourself as a part of. And so as the internet brings out these loud voices and creates these mobs, it's easy to want to just be a part of that. Even if you're not, I don't really care about what this person said about this thing, but I get to be a part of the mob that's passing.
I get to be a part of the cool kids.
I get to be a part of the cool kids.
I get to sit at the cool kids table. I get to feel like I'm part of the in crowd here. Just think of the peer pressure that you experienced as a middle school kid. Now it's ramped up to 11 because it's on the internet. And so one, you don't have the relational barriers between you and these people. They're just out there somewhere in the ether. And two, the mob is so much bigger. The cool factor of being a part of the mob is super appealing. And the pressure of not being a part of the mob or the cool kids is really intense. And so everything's just kind of cranked up.
Well, I want to color in something that Jake just said, which is there's this whole level of interaction that people just take for granted now that you could argue is pretty unnatural. If I post something on Facebook, for example, to use an old form of social media that the kids aren't into anymore, my Aunt Bertha sees that and she posts on it, she reacts to it. And then my friend Steve sees it and he reacts to it. And they're both arguing, well, Bertha and Steve aren't from the same social class. They're not from the same age. They don't have the same frame of reference. There's nothing in the world that would naturally bring Bertha and Steve together and make them have a conversation about, let's say, abortion.
Right.
Something like that intense, right?
Right.
The only time Bertha and Steve may come into contact with each other is they might bump into each other at the grocery store. And then Bertha's like, oh, excuse me. And Steve is like, if he's a nice guy, he's like, oh, ma'am, I'm sorry, I was the one. Or if he's a jerk, he's like, well, Bertha, you're fat.
But because he's actually facing Bertha and she's right there and there are consequences to saying she's fat, he's not going to actually say that.
More likely than not. 10. But then suddenly you take that away and you put it on the internet and it's like, well, now we've skipped all of the levels of developing any kind of relationship where we have any kind of meaningful conversation. And now we're talking about some of the most intense and meaningful things. And it just like... gets out of control.
I think the internet really is a heart detector.
Yeah.
That which person is the real person? Is it the person who makes nasty comments on the internet, or is it the person who talks nice to you in the grocery store? Well, I would argue that most of the time, the anonymity of the internet and the self-importance that it kind of generates, which is sinfulness in itself, it generates this revealing of the heart and what's inside a person that would not normally be there. It's one thing to be sitting across from Jake or Nathan and tell Nathan, man, you're a big loser. That would be hard to say face to face, but on the internet, I don't have to look at you. I can just type it out, and the anonymity shields me from doing that.
Right.
That's right. It also gives you the freedom to go those places in your mind and in your heart that you wouldn't maybe even let yourself go or think those thoughts. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the overflow of the heart, the fingers type.
Yeah.
But man, just the relational checks that we have in place really do check even your heart from going places that it really shouldn't go in your judgments of people and the things that you're willing to even think about them.
So for people unfamiliar with this, and I think people really are familiar with this, they just don't realize it. What are some big examples that are out there of this taking place, the cancel culture phenomenon?
One big example would be Donald Trump. Twitter canceled him. Facebook canceled him. So he can't have access to social media platforms anymore. There's a whole movement to cancel Donald Trump and silence his voice, right? The mainstream networks aren't going to have him on to talk anymore.
Well, I think it's important to say we're not here today to litigate the goodness or badness of President Donald Trump.
Right.
What we're saying is that there wasn't some kind of a due process. The mob just said, we don't want to hear from this guy anymore.
And so they silenced
him.
For the record, I think that Facebook had a hearing on Donald Trump like last week in order to litigate whether he should be back on. There was never like a hearing or anything like that.
No, what actually happened was Facebook made a ruling that was not based in any of their rules or guidelines. They kicked it to this board, this oversight board, which is outside of Facebook. The oversight board basically kicked it back. They said, we're not going to make this decision for you, Facebook, because you haven't actually followed your own rules. You just made an arbitrary decision to cancel President Donald Trump. That's weird. Like if you have a rule, again, this is about
And that a rule that you apply across the board.
A rule that you apply across the board. That's fine. That's one thing. We can say yay or nay, you followed it or you didn't. But this is just kind of an arbitrary thing. And so what are we, your oversight board, supposed to do with this?
So that's one example of just, we don't like you. We don't like what you have to say. We're uncomfortable. We silence you, right? Another that people may be familiar with is Gina Carano. Gina Carano is an actress, starred on The Mandalorian, and in fact, set to be a star of a spin-off show of The Mandalorian, Rangers of the New Republic, which they had just announced a month before this happened. She made a couple of comments on Instagram, and the mob ran with it. Disney fired her. Now she can't get a job in Hollywood. Gina Carano, from being a Disney Star Wars top franchise star to can't get a job in Hollywood because of some comments she made on Instagram.
You used a term a while ago that I don't know whether people understand it or not. You used the term doxed. So what does the word doxed mean?
Yeah, doxing is when internet geeks with keyboards and hacker skills figure out details about your life and who you are, details about your family, about where you live, about where you work. And so somebody like Gina Carano doesn't need to be doxed. Everybody knows who Gina Carano is. When somebody like Nathan Alberson writes an article on the internet, people are going to be like, we want this nerd canceled. So we're going to find out where he lives. We're going to find out where he works. We're going to find out the name of his boss. We're going to find out his loved ones. We're going to find out about his church. We're going to do a ton of research into his background. We're going to find out all these things and find all the different places and ways we can put pressure.
Should we just tell this story real quick?
Nathan, we should tell this story.
This is not hypothetical.
This isn't hypothetical.
2016. So me and Jake both work also for a company called Warhorn Media, Christian media company. You can listen to all our wonderful podcasts.
You should.
Yeah. Sound of Sanity, Sanity at the Movies, if you like movies. Anyway, we were just
DeVille, if you like cool stories.
DeVille, if you like cool stories. Anyway, we were just getting going, and I wrote this article about feminism and Star Wars. This was the first of the new batch of Star Wars movies. The first one with Rey had just come out. And so I wrote an article about how her femininity wasn't necessarily Christian femininity. Made some broader application about biblical sexuality. Somehow some writer for Star Trek, and this is just a little article, like, I don't know, how much circulation were we getting at this
We
time?
had just started this website, okay? So we had maybe had probably between 2,000 and 5,000 visits a month. It was like March.
Right.
We launched this website, and so just a couple thousand people had maybe gone through it. And then, we're beginning of April, Nathan writes this article, and it's one of the first articles we ever even write.
Yeah, and then some random semi-celebrity, maybe a Twitter user or a Facebook user, I think he was a writer for Star Trek, and he found the article, and he shared it on social media as an example of old-fashioned misogyny, of sexism, of just somebody being a dinosaur, basically. And it just went crazy and got shared on Twitter, and people were writing blogs, and
hundreds of thousands of visits. Our web tech guy had to do all kinds of, we were getting server attacks and had to do a bunch of stuff to keep our website from going down.
That's crazy.
And remember, we're nobody. Like, basically what these people heard was a random guy thinks something that I think is stupid. And suddenly they're angry. And I'm getting these tweets. So many people made this hilarious joke, where they would find a picture of the biblical story, the book of Judges. There's a woman named Jael who beheads the enemy captain or whatever it is. And people would find paintings, old paintings and pictures of this happening. And they would say, this is biblical femininity, or this should happen to you.
And they'd Photoshop Nathan's face onto...
Wow.
You know.
Right. And there was one, I think my favorite was somebody who said Daisy Ridley, the actress who plays Rey in Star Wars, should bench press this fool into the sun.
which that's realistic, right?
Yeah, obviously I would be down for that. We all would like to see that. Daisy Ridley, if you're listening.
Yes.
And I know you like NorthWoods podcast. If you'd like to bench press me into the sun, you can. And so thousands of people, literally saying nasty things about me on the internet, trying to maliciously log into our website, trying to figure out and put together who I am, where I live, what I am. And so there's all these people out there, they don't even know me. They don't know who I am. And they're saying...
It got way more personal than that too. And that's why you had to take it seriously because, tell them about what happened at your job.
Yeah, okay. So the article actually spread so far that it came back home. And I was not working for Warhorn Media at the time. I was still working a regular job. I was a supervisor at a call center. And I go into the call center one day, and a woman, fellow supervisor, a peer at the job, and someone that I'd always had a really friendly relationship, kind of snarled at me. And I said, "Oh, what's up?" And she said, "I saw your article." And I said, "Oh, what'd you think?" And she said, "Some pretty interesting things." And and so then...
So you liked it.
Yes. Oh, good. It was interesting.
That was interesting. Good.
Great. So then everybody is kind of treating me cold, and I'm not sure what's going on. There was another girl, someone that had to work under me, who came in and said, "I'm not comfortable working with you, Nathan," or something like that. And I said, "Well, do you want to have coffee and maybe talk about this? Would you like to, could we off work? I could explain where I'm coming from, and I'm not actually the monster, and I don't think every woman should be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, obviously." And and she said, "I don't think you'd like to hear what I have to say about it." I was like, "Well, you don't know. You just know that you..." Anyway,
yeah,
we never did get that coffee. I went on with my job. A couple years later, I found out that I had come pretty close to losing my job. I didn't actually hear about this at the time because I wasn't part of the conversation. But what happened was they called a meeting. I was working in Bloomington at the time, which is an hour south of Indianapolis. They called it a meeting in Indianapolis, had people drive to that site. So people had to drive an hour to talk about me. And they had this meeting where they said, "What are we going to do about Nathan? He's trouble. He thinks these terrible things about women, whatever." And praise God, a guy, my direct manager, not a man of God, but just a good man.
Yeah.
Someone that God provided for my life, someone that I have a lot of respect for. He got up and he said, "Listen, people, if we had ever seen 1 ounce of sexism in Nathan's work, if any of this had come out, if Nathan was this way, then maybe we could do something. But has it occurred to any of you that whatever Nathan thinks privately, he does his job well, and he doesn't corner people and tell them his horrible philosophies on work time? Has anyone thought about the fact that Nathan he isn't this guy?"
Right.
And they hadn't thought about it. They were actually surprised by that. Like, oh, yeah, like it was a new thought to them. Oh, yeah, Nathan...
he's actually a good supervisor.
He's a good supervisor. There's a reason that have him in this position, and whatever this article means, it doesn't mean he's that. And so they all decided, well, I guess, if we ever see Nathan do anything terrible, we can get rid of him, but we'll let him stay. I don't want to overhype it. I don't know that my life was in danger. I don't know that I seriously came close to losing my job, but they had to have a conversation about it. And all because I had an opinion, a biblical, I was just writing about what the Bible says about sexuality, some stuff that's not as popular now, but by and large, people have always believed and is not news to anyone who's a Christian who's read their Bible.
But of course, these people weren't engaging with it at that level. None of them took the time to understand who I actually was or what I was actually saying. If they'd done that, they would have understood I wasn't saying anything monstrous. But instead, they just assumed it was the simplest, most terrible version of itself, that I was a monster, and the mob got all riled up and went after me. And you'd think that it wouldn't hurt that much when it's a bunch of strangers, or maybe, I don't know what you'd expect.
But what I found is it does hurt.
Yeah.
Because they are very personal. They called me fat. They called me neck beard. I actually lost maybe 30 pounds and shaved my neck. So thank you, Twitter mob. But it's kind of hurtful when there's hundreds of people out there that are talking about how they don't like you and they don't know you. And so, yeah, I didn't know we were going to go into this, but yes.
Well, I'm glad you shared it because it makes it a whole lot more personal than just talking about Ellen or Donald Trump or something
right.
Like
and
that.
it's where people, I think, can really feel it here. It's like, well, the dangers of being just a public Christian, somebody who actually believes the Bible and is unashamed to own what the Bible says about basic things like God made a man and not a woman, and a woman and not a man, and those are different, and you can't actually change that. Little things like that, it's dangerous.
I think that Christians are really feeling it because the culture is turned in such a way that Christians are no longer the majority, or evangelical Christians are no longer the majority. And I think in our age, this is what persecution in the U.S. is starting to look like.
Right.
It's not only censorship. Cancel culture is not just censorship. It goes beyond just saying, you can't say that.
Right.
It's actively trying to harm somebody because of what they've said, going after their job, going after their place of
That's right.
Their home or their kids or nothing is out of bounds, really.
That's right.
In order to get after certain people. So I think we've already touched on this. So why is this phenomenon such a big deal?
Because anytime you take out due process and the rule of law and start to prosecute thought crimes by mob justice, you have a really horrible, tyrannical situation where there's not freedom to just be, to live, to work, to be a free thinker. The direction things are going to just honor God with your family, with your thoughts, with your words.
Once you empower the mob, I mean, if people have read their history, if they know about the French Revolution, those guys riled up a mob, and then the mob ended up devouring its own. All the guys that led the French Revolution fell under the guillotine later. I mean, it's the classic irony. Once you've empowered the mob, there's no saying who it's going to come for next.
Well, the mob doesn't operate under any kind of objective standards of morality, any kind of code. It's just what we want now.
Yeah.
Right.
A great example of that is Ellen DeGeneres. I mean, for a long time, she was a cultural hero. And then last year, there came these reports about she was mean-spirited in the workplace. And then all of a sudden, the mob turned and we want to cancel Ellen because she's mean to people. And it was just announced earlier this week that she's going to retire her show.
Right.
And you can't help but think that has something to do.
Yeah, she says something like, it's not a challenge anymore, but everybody knows.
Yeah,
it's a little bit more
really
going on.
Well, there's another example that just happened, which was some kid. I don't watch American Idol, but apparently there was a kid on American Idol who was pretty popular, one of the top 5 finalists this year. And a photo came out of him, quote unquote, standing next to a KKK member. What he was actually doing was standing next to somebody who had a pillowcase over their head with eye sockets torn out, dressed as a horror character from a movie. But the mob immediately assumed he's standing next to KKK. He must be KKK. He is canceled. And he was canceled. He was off the show. Whatever career he was going to get out of it is done. And it's like, there could be some due process, some way of figuring out, is this guy a racist? Is he not? But that's not what happened. What happened is everybody saw a photograph and then we burned this guy's potential career to the ground and he just lost it all. And so these are the kinds of things that are happening all the time.
Yeah. And so it goes beyond just censorship. It is actually going out and seeking harm to people.
That's right.
Yeah. So do Christians engage in cancel culture? Is this just a lost people phenomenon?
It's so easy to get caught up in a mob mentality and an us versus them mentality. And especially that's the kind of thing that is pushed as the framework for how we engage the world from everything that we talk about this all the time with something like,
we just did a 3-hour pod. If anybody wants to listen to a 3-hour podcast on The Matrix, the original Matrix, we just,
I'm down with that.
Yeah, we just did. And The Matrix is a fun movie, right? But you remember the famous conceit of The Matrix is Morpheus gives this speech to Neo, which watching it now is kind of chilling, where he says, if people are still plugged into the Matrix, then they are part of the system. This is almost the word for word the speech, and therefore they are the enemy.
So if you're a part of the corrupt system, you're the enemy, you're the other, and you deserve to die. And it doesn't matter if you're aware of it. We're not litigating your own personal innocence. We're not trying to protect you or anything. You're part of the system. You are the other. You are bad. Therefore, you deserve to die.
Yeah.
Right. And that theme you see in all kinds of movies, even our superhero movies that we think are friendly and fun and cool, Guardians of the Galaxy or something like that, where it's just like, actually, if you get down to it, we're not talking about objective right and wrong here. We're talking about us versus them. Christians, then, we can watch these movies and think, oh yeah, that would be fun. That would be cool if not me, if the other, finally got it.
Let's talk about just the insanity of how selfish it is. If you're living in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you get offended by an article by Nathan Alberson, living in Bloomington, Indiana, and then you get so upset about it that you do like a server attack on a company in Indiana.
It is crazy that people from Nevada would think they actually knew me and knew what I stood for. It's like
enough to make a personal judgment that you're going to be the executioner for somebody's life.
Yeah, they're going to actively take a role in harming.
Yeah.
And Christians are not above this. Christians are not above doing it to pagans and to other Christian organizations. We are all blame shifters. You look in Genesis 3 when God comes and Adam and Eve's sin is discovered. Adam blames the woman blames the snake. From the very beginning, we want to shift the blame and we want it to be outside of us. That's human nature. The heart is wicked.
If we can just make a sacrifice out there somewhere of somebody, if only there was somebody that we could sacrifice.
It goes from someone.
If only there was somebody.
If only there was somebody. So here's a big issue with cancel culture. It's that who decides what gets canceled, and then how does a society determine what is moral or immoral? I mean, that's a big deal, right?
I think every society determines what is moral based on its religion. I think every society is religious. I think every society worships something. I think every society has gods. Not every society thinks about it that way, but these mobs, the mob that came after me, they were worshiping something. They had a god. You could call it wokeness. You could call it feminism. I don't know what you want to say their god was.
I would say self.
Self. Yeah, right. A woman shouldn't be bound by anything. I mean, in this particular case, shouldn't be bound by any kind of rules or biblical anything. And the fact that you would even say that she might be bound by biology, Nathan, just like God made women a certain way. Like, that's all I said. But that was really offensive because self-actualization was their God.
Yeah, and I think that pride is really the root sin of a lot of things on social media. I mean, the need for somebody to get on social media and say, my coffee was not served properly today at Proper Coffee, and shame on the barista for doing that.
Right.
I mean, since when does the world revolve around you and your coffee order that you need the affirmation to do that?
You can think of it almost as an inversion of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto me the way that I would have you do unto me, or else. Right? It's sort of that entitlement mentality.
Yeah.
And it's just that entitlement mentality. Do unto me the way I would have you do unto me, or else.
Yeah.
And that is a victim mindset. It's an entitled mindset that is, like you said, it's selfish and it's prideful and it's all about me. And instead, as Christians, our job is to actually love our neighbor as ourself, right? And to do unto others the way we would have them do to us. It's proactively finding ways to do good to others.
And I think another interesting insight is, I mean, everybody's got a view of salvation too. What does correctness in society look like? What does a fixed world look like? And for those that are engaged in cancel culture, salvation looks like we're going to get rid of all the people that are bad.
Right.
Or we're just going to eliminate all those people.
Yeah, I've seen that sci-fi movie. That doesn't end well.
Soylent Green, it's people. It's people. But theologically, as Christians, we look at that and we're like, you just have to get rid of everybody. I mean, that's everybody's sinful. You just can't possibly get rid of all the bad people.
What's wrong with the world?
Yeah.
I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And inherently in cancel culture, there's the thought of, well, I'm all right. It's that guy that's really bad. Thanks for tuning in to the NorthWoods Church Matters podcast. If you'd like to find out more about NorthWoods Church, you can visit us at our website, www.northwoodschurch.org. Again, that's www.northwoodschurch.org.